Thank you very much, gentlemen. I am joined by Mithy. Congratulations on the 2-0. Congratulations on sweeping your group in the first round robin. Let's start with game 2. Why was it so close?
I think we told Trick to leave us bot and just we knew that Ivern was coming bot lane and we had a really huge advantage bot, and instead we told Trick to just take his camps on top side. And instead what happened was that we traded sides and it didn't really work out as planned because we had an advantage bot and we could have snowballed through that. And we also thought that Riven was going to be much more useless later in the game. So we thought that if we starve him, then it's better for us because we weren't even losing anything from losing bot tower, just the whole map being more open. Yeah. So yeah, it kind of we planned it ahead, but it didn't work out how we thought it would work out.
Yeah, it definitely looked away a little bit messy towards the end. That Baron fight definitely catching everyone by surprise. Let's talk about the first game. That's the first perfect game that we've seen in Europe since Spring 2016. Is that something you were aware of in the game, or was that just a happy accident?
I think it was a happy accident. Someone mentioned it at some point, when we were ending, everyone was like, oh, perfect endgame, and that's when I realized myself. But I think we didn't really have it in mind when we were playing. It could have gone in a much way worse way. When we fought mid, we were stronger, so the fight was fine, but it wasn't really in our terms, so we kind of screwed up there, but it ended up being a perfect game, so it was all good.
What feels better for you, Mithy? A perfect game for the first time in a year, or going 4-0 in the first time facing all of your opponents in Group A?
I mean, I've always had the same mindset where I really don't care about the split in itself because of my time in Lemon Dogs where I won the split and then lost at playoffs. So I'm keeping that mindset. Yeah, I'd rather just have clean games. I think the perfect game, even though it was perfect, we didn't really fight on our terms on the fight that won us the game, so we can still play better.
I'm really, really happy to hear that. I'm looking forward to seeing whether or not G2 will play better. Next week, you guys are doing some cross-group games. It's the first time we're going to see that. H2K and Roccat. What's your opinions on H2K, seeing how they lost to UOL last week? And what are your predictions for that series?
I think it's fair to lose to UOL. They are the strongest teams, and they had probably the best grasp in the meta. Maybe they still do have it once the new patch comes in, because they were playing Warwick and so on. So I don't underestimate them because they lost to UL. I think that they are a very strong team and their bot lane is very smart. We have scrimmed them a lot, and I just hope we can pull through and win.
I want to ask a question about that. You've scrimmed them a lot. Now, this is the first time that we're going to see cross-group play here in Europe. This is the first time that now all of a sudden your scrim partners now become your opponent partners, so or your opponents on the Rift. How does that dynamic impact your preparation going from week 3 to week 4 onwards?
I mean, it's the same as before, right? Nothing really changes, just that, I mean, the best thing about this whole system is the fact that you're playing best of 3s. I think that's it's really amazing that you can actually play a series and not just split games, even though maybe that hurts us at Worlds again because we're playing best of 1s, but we will see. I think that it doesn't really affect us. Our scrim partners, our scrim schedule obviously changes between week and week because sometimes you face your own group, sometimes you face people from other groups, but at the end of the day, as long as you get to practice what you want to practice, it doesn't really matter who you play against.
Okay, it doesn't matter who you play against now. You're not going to face UOL for a couple of weeks. Who would win if you were to play UOL today, and why?
It's hard to say because we play a lot more, I mean, everyone can see that our games on stage are a lot more systematic than they are in scrims. In scrims, we usually, a lot of people get caught. I think there's not 100% focus, even though we try to be. We test a little bit more of our limits, so there's some a lot more deaths. So when we play against UL and they basically just embrace the whole 1 million deaths meta, so they usually come out ahead. So judging from scrims, they would probably have a small lead, but I think we would have a good. We would just be good at adapting on stage, so I think it would be close. It would be close.
It would be close. I like that. Not willing to 100% say you would win, but leaning towards it. Mithy, one last question. Let's step back. We've talked a lot about now looking forward the opponent teams. How has the G2 gaming house changed? Now you've got this additional support staff. I was watching Sharks and Youngbuck backstage really discussing Game 2 quite heavily. So explain to me how the coaching staff and the additional support staff is impacting G2's play.
Well, it was explained somewhere. Sharks basically helps Joey with whatever he's doing, and they try to improve each other. And then Weldon is doing the same too, but at the same time he is giving us a little bit more of like he's just pet talking us and giving us like some insight into a little bit of like sports psychology. I don't want to call it sports psychology, or he doesn't want to call it sports psychology. I don't really.
It's just mindset,
maybe
right? A healthy mindset, being in a good like
basically
mind space.
just being in a good mindset for the games and like towards improving and so on. So I think between the three, they kind of criticize each other and they make each other better, and we also criticize them a lot. Yeah. So
who criticizes you, Mithy?
I criticize myself the most, and then from there on, I think my teammates, and then my coaching stuff.
Okay, good. That's what I like to hear. Hopefully Sven gives you a lot of trouble. Mithy, congratulations not only on the game today, perfect game, and of course the 4-0 for now. That does it for me here with Mithy. We're going to head over to the post-game lobby. Dracos, take it away.
Thank you very much, EpicSkillshot, and welcome everyone to the post-game lobby, where we're going to look back on today's games. I'm, of course, once again joined by the same people as the last segment. Surprise, surprise, no mix-up here. It's Deficio, Alfari, Daku coming in to back me up in this one. And I want to start by taking a look at that last game in the series. We hadn't had a chance to cover it yet. Of course, Game 2, Giants versus G2. I think we can safely say completely different than the first game. Riven comes in. We thought it was going to be bad, but it feels like it kind of worked out.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it was better than expected.
Yeah, it was better than expected.
We saw your tweet.
Yeah.
Called out the Riven instantly. I was ready to reply when we were like 45 minutes into the game if Giants had won, being like, oh, you're wrong. But what would you have liked to see different from that Riven?
I mean, I think the main problem with this Riven pick is that it's just so weak for team fighting versus like a Ryze, a Zyra, a Rek'Sai. These champions that can just easily CC you. I think if they want to go for a Riven, like late game, you need to have a QSS or at least Mercury Trez. Try and mitigate the CC that you can actually not get one shot like, as soon as you go in. Because you saw like later on in these team fights, you just go in, like get hit by like a Ryze W for 2 seconds and he's gone.
Well, we did see, of course, I mean, one of the big moments, of course, was one of those team fights at Baron or around the Baron area for Giants, where we did see the Riven be effective. And it was kind of at this point that we started to question. The Deficio was ready to respond to your salty tweet sarcastically, but of course, Riven not in the team fight this time, instead fighting on the back line.
Well, I think I don't know if it's so much the Riven pick here as much as it is just Mithy kind of mispositioning at the start of this fight. Like there was really no reason for him to be there, and he got one-shotted, and it's just messy from G2 really. Like yeah, the Riven pick is nice for chasing and doing damage, but realistically in a 5v5 it shouldn't happen.
I do respect them picking the Riven, because like I know we talk so much about simple comps versus hard comps to execute, and obviously Riven compositions kind of fall under the hard one. Yeah. But the fact that you lose first game is like perfect game. You feel like it's really hard for you to do anything to like win that second game, and you try and throw that big like curveball. If Riven was the correct choice, you can argue against like as a coach. Do you also agree with this philosophy of like throwing out some of these completely new picks if you feel like you're an underdog?
I don't, because I think if you're the underdog, your goal during the split is just to improve as much as you can. So I would say take this opportunity to play the best team in the league and see how you can shore up with them on regular picks. Because it's so much easier to see macro mistakes after that when you're used to these specific picks. So like, for example, if they had Rumble or Trundle, Trundle can do a very similar role to what Riven was doing that game, can just split push. And you could see how you played the 1-3-1 wrong or the 4-1 wrong. With Rumble, you can see how you played teamfights wrong or where you should have TP'd. Like, you can improve so much more as a macro team if you just play the regular picks. But I feel like with Riven, you lose out on that opportunity a bit.
And Riven, of course, very lackluster. And while we did get to see some Riven highlight moments, obviously a very solid score in the end, there was that crucial team fight where Riven, kind of as expected, with no tools to block the CC, just got popped immediately.
Alfari actually yelled during this fight, "This is why you need QSS!" As soon as he jumps in, and he's gone.
There he goes. Slowly but surely, takes a couple seconds there on the shutdown, but of course that's the disastrous setup. Riven, not quite the tanky Mal guy. Definitely does not want to go in first. And once again, an exciting pick to watch, an exciting pick to see. But at the end of the day, just when it's coming in through the front, when you see it coming, it just does not feel very impactful.
Nah, and again, G2 had a good comp to also deal with it in fights. Idea obviously was that Riven would kind of try and win the side lane split push. Problem was G2's composition as well. Like, it's not just Shen global. There's also Rek'Sai global. There's Ashe Arrow, which is fantastic against teams who wants to try and split push, like force fights, especially around mid lane. And then also we had one more pick, I forgot, Ryze as well. Obviously winning the other side lane against Talir. So it was never 1-3-1 from Giants. It was more like can Riven win on her own on the side? Otherwise, we have to team fight our way out, and then Riven is obviously way weaker than most tanks, and that's kind of one of the issues for them.
Well, of course, after a perfect game as well, we're going to award player of the series, but it was kind of a big team effort across the board for G2, but Expect is going to win it out in the end. I think that second game, really an amazing Shen performance for him, mitigating any advantages the Riven could have had. So I'm curious how far Riven, Shen, I mean, is the Shen expected to win out here? What's your thoughts?
I don't think Shen should fall behind. Like, once Riven gets Black Cleaver, he should be able to like win pretty handily 1v1, but he never got to do that this game. And Shen's just like much better for team fighting, for making plays both side, and Expect had like pretty good taunt flashes this game, so I guess he deserves it.
Is Expect the best top laner in Group A, or are you the best top laner in Group A?
I'm better than him.
Boom. I like it.
I like how you don't even include anyone else in the picture. You're like, these two.
All right. I mean, who else right now?
Of course, it wasn't all Group A. Well, I mean, there's no one else right now. I don't know. I agree. I agree. All right, I'm pulling back. Now, of course, the early series we saw today was H2K versus Vitality. That one, I'd say not quite what we expected going in, but at the end of the day, it was that H2K victory. I want to take a chance to talk about it once again for those of you who missed out on viewing it live. Now, Vitality did start off pretty strong here, and things went downhill pretty quickly. So what do you think we learned from both of these teams watching this series?
I think from H2K's end, I still think their vision needs to improve quite a bit. Like in the middle late game, they still seem kind of lost on like how to efficiently close out the game. Alongside that, they had target selection issues last week, and they still seem to have that. And it's kind of disappointing that it hasn't improved over time. And I hope they work on it, because this team has the potential to be really good. But these team fights just aren't playing out the way they're supposed to for them.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this during the game. How H2K will have like 2 or 3 really good fights where it's like, all right, everything is working, and then when they're actually in a goal lead, they have like this one fight, but it's over chase, one guy gets caught out. This was a fine play by Vitality at first, but then they obviously invest everything on one guy and get MF ulted as well. But this like inability for H2K to kind of execute every team fight is an issue. Like they just over chase. That's what I'm at least seeing in these games. Not sure if you guys agree on that, but it happened quite a few times. Like Fibben would like Val get in, and then he would get caught.
And it's something we talked about on the desk as well. Is it was just a constant series of over chases from both sides. Vitality finding leads, throwing them away on over chasing, or over committing, especially in game 3 to a composition where you weren't going to find a pick off against an Ivern and a Shen. And it was kind of a similar story back and forth. Of course, H2K throwing a few of those team fights, and it really wasn't the clean gameplay expected from H2K, or the one that we can kind of idealize to come out from Vitality in the end.
But do we actually expect clean gameplay from anyone in week 3 of a spring split?
From either group, or?
I'm just saying, like overall, because like most teams are kind of, they make roster changes, they figure out stuff, new meta and everything coming into the spring split. Week 3, is that too early to actually say like, why are you not executing cleanly right now? That normally comes later around playoffs.
I think for the rosters that stayed the same, I'd expect them to at least have much cleaner games than the other ones, because the communication system should just carry over. So for G2 and for Splyce, I expect a lot more than, I think at least for Splyce from what we've seen.
Yeah.
And then even G2, like the second game was not as clean as it should have been. So for those teams, I think you can argue that, yes, they should be much cleaner games. Even if it is week 3 of the new season, they still have all the tools transferring over. For the newer teams, I can understand if just, time for growth, it's the same for us, but we'll see.
I'd be curious to see as well. Of course, we've now finished our series for the day. Let's take a chance to look at those standings and to see how they're shaping up. Of course, G2 playing their final series does win out. Now securing first place, placing themselves above you guys safely in second.
It hurts
after the first round robin. We'll see how Fnatic does and if they can pass up Giants. But is there anything that really stands out to you here that was surprising after some of these teams have now completed their first round robin?
Unicorns of Love being first place in Group B is a bit surprising, and Splyce being 1-2, also quite surprising.
I think the Splyce one is the big one, because I expect a lot more from them than what we've seen. Like their teamwork is what they were praised for last year, and I think that's weirdly enough where they're falling apart these days. It just seems like sometimes they're not on the same page, and so maybe it'll get better as we go on. Of course, it's still week 3. Maybe they're out of practice. I don't know, but like for Splyce, I think they really need to step up for what's expected of them from Group B.
And now we have the games tomorrow, and then obviously from next week it's the cross group play. You guys will start playing Unicorns, Splyce, H2K, all these different teams. Anyone specifically you're looking forward to play?
I think Splyce and H2K will both be fun to play, or also Unicorns of Love, obviously. Like first in their group, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, I think Group B is just a lot of fun to play against, to be honest. All the best teams are there.
Group B feels really chaotic.
Except for G2.
Except for G2, it's actually true.
Absolutely. Now, of course, let's take a chance to look at those games tomorrow. You brought them up briefly, but as we look at tomorrow's schedule, I'm kind of curious to see how these next couple matches will unfold. Will give us a better picture of how the groups are going to stack up. And it seems to me that we have some pretty safe assumptions on who's going to come out on top here. Do you guys see any potential for upsets?
I think maybe Roccat could beat Fnatic, like at least maybe take one game. I think it's kind of realistic. Maybe even take the series. I'm not entirely sure, but I think there's definitely the potential there.
I think I just want to see like if Fnatic fixes the draft or the champion pool issues, because we did get away with that in our series against them. I didn't like the drafts much, and it seems like they didn't play the champions that are strong in this patch. So if they can fix that for Roccat, then I think they'll be in a good spot. But otherwise, there is an upset potential there.
Yeah. Curious to see how it unfolds. Of course, we'll find out tomorrow. But other thing that happened today is we saw an interview with Prawley, and he brought up kind of that the Shen Ivern comp was the quote-unquote easy composition, right? That it was like the simple composition to play, that it had this inevitable scaling that you were sure to win if you could take it to late game. And I was curious how you guys felt about that, and if you think that's accurate given the current meta.
I'm not sure if Shen is like a free win late game, but I definitely do agree with Ivern being like by far the best scaling jungler at the moment. So whenever you have Ivern, typically going to win late game because it's just like the shields, redemption, locket. It's just so hard to teamfight against it.
The only downfall I feel like we see with Ivern comps is in case they don't have enough damage. But again, with the current AD carries being used, like Corki mid, these kind of things, you almost always have enough damage. I think once we saw a combo that ran like double physical damage, they were against the Shen themselves and they had Ivern and they just kind of ran out of damage because Shen could block so many of the autos. But apart from that, the fact that Ivern literally gives tankiness to squishy members and at CC as well, it makes the carries too strong, almost, that they have so much extra HP.
Sorry, I think one thing that goes unnoticed is that it's not just that it's easier to play in game, it's very easy to draft Ivern comps as well, because it seems to fit in almost every single type of play. So even if teams are poor at drafting, if they just pick up the Ivern, they will probably have a cohesive comp regardless, and a comp that'll scale well into mid and late game. So they can make mistakes in drafting and get away with it, which I think is a huge strength of the pick as well.
Is it easier to punish in scrims, where people might invade early compared to on stage? Or is that exactly the same in scrims as well?
Well, I think the new pick that Trick pulled out, at least in LCS, Graves, like worked pretty well against Ivern. I think champions like these, which can can be uncontested in the jungle, like when invading, versus Ivern, are going to be particularly good against Ivern, and I expect we'll see more champions like this in the future versus it. That's like more teams think about what's good against it.
So do you think this is just a kind of a matter of adaptation for the Ivern pick? It is still relatively new. You think in the next couple of weeks maybe we'll see more teams with an answer to the pick and it will be less powerful overall, or is it still something that you absolutely have to be willing to like kind of shut down in the pick fan phase? Maybe ban away, maybe pick it as a priority just to take it off the table?
I think for the next few weeks you probably have to think about it like very heavily when you're planning pick and ban, but as teams get better at snowballing early games, for example, or playing split push or poke, like these different variations and compositions, then I think you'll see Ivern fall off a bit. But right now, for the most part, everyone's trying to play team fight. There's very few teams that are trying split push. G2 played 1-3-1 today, and it was excellent in both games. So that's where I think Ivern will eventually fall off.
And most other teams who actually try to play split push would lose. Like we saw Fnatic yesterday try and do it with like Zed and so on, and it is really hard to execute, especially with the new rosters where communication is an issue, because like 1-3-1 comes, every single lane is talking like all the time, they're all pressuring together. And when that falls short, well then the Ivern comp is just the superior one.
Well, it's good that you bring that up, because the other thing that Probably discussed was kind of that he didn't want to play this comp, which he considered easy, because he wanted the team to play more complicated things, save the easy comps for the games that really matter later in the season, or a team that you want to save everything for. Do you think that's a viable strategy here in the early weeks, where you should just be trying to play the most difficult, the most complex kind of composition to force the team to develop more, or should you just be playing what will net you wins?
It depends if you're bottom team or top team. I feel like if you feel confident you're going to make playoffs, I respect the whole let's try and play more complicated things and then realize all our mistakes and use these mistakes to then improve later. But if you are, let's say, Giants or Rocket, and you're really fighting to try and get out of relegation and sneak into playoffs, I think you have to play what's easy and what's effective right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think generally, like on LCS, it's only like one series a week. So you should at least try to win, I think. And then you have so many days of scrims, which you can just practice other stuff, which is maybe harder, maybe like less likely to win, and try and improve that instead.
And there's also the factor where, like, sure, you might be a top team, and so you might be okay playing more complex comps on stage, but there's also the option of just playing the simple one and practicing those complex comps in scrims. and then pulling them out for games that actually matter. So I don't necessarily think like you need stage practice with difficult compositions to play them effectively. You just need efficient scrim practice.
We heard a lot last year. Players and coaches were talking about how you could only get real practice on stage because scrims would just be like so bad. Like everyone would kill each other 20 times in 10 minutes and then just FF the game and go next. You guys obviously scrimming in Europe have been scrimming now for quite some time, and also scrimmed in Korea before in the off season. Is European scrim culture better now? Is it less 20 million kills and then FF?
Compared to before, yes. I actually think all the coaches, or most of the coaches that I've talked to, have made drastic changes to how the team, just practices overall and how on time they are for scrims. One thing that when we were in Korea was in my opinion, really effective was that between the two blocks there was a 2-hour break. So the second block always felt really effective because you had such a long time to reset. I think that's the only difference between Korea and EU in terms of practice. The second block still feels a little bit, out of sync because people are tired and you can see that they're not making the best decisions, which they normally wouldn't. But overall, I think Europe's really stepped up this year for scrim culture overall.
Do you agree, Alfari?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really notice a big difference from this year and last year. Like, scrimming is still scrimming.
I mean, it's kind of good to hear that that's been an
glad to hear from
improvement.
Coach, though.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it was a pretty large criticism. And do you have any thoughts on like why has this changed? Is it just that all of Europe wants to level up and get better? Was this a conscious effort across teams, or is it just that as teams are improving, scrim culture is kind of improving along with them?
No, it was definitely a conscious effort. Like before the season started, all the coaches got together and we all talked about how we wanted to practice. So it was very much an active effort to try to improve everything, because last year there were definitely some complaints in terms of like either how on time teams were or the tilt factor that some players would have. So there were issues with scrims, and I'm actually very impressed with the EU coaches this year. I think they've done an excellent job in elevating the scene.
So my kind of final question on this subject is, we have cross-group play coming up. You heard QuickShot mention it earlier, talking with Mithy, and I'm curious how that's going to affect you guys. I assume mostly scrimming outside your group for now. Is scheduling scrims just going to be a disaster? Do you guys already have planned who you're going to practice against? How does that affect your preparation?
In our case, going into the season, we made a goal, which was we'll scrim all the top teams that we can get, because for Misfits, the goal is to improve as much as we can in the regular season and then show up in playoffs. Now, maybe the goal is different for G2 or for Splice or these other teams that have different expectations than us. But for us, it hasn't really mattered too much. We're just looking to scrim all the top teams and then just performing on stage.
All right, and I kind of wanted to close out here. I want just some final expectations. We've had 3 weeks now. We're finishing up the first round robin. Of course, one more day of play left before we finish that out. How are we feeling about Europe overall as a region? Do we once again have these very secluded teams at the top? Is it very top-weighted like it was last season with H2K Splice? Do we expect it to stay that way? What are the feelings?
I don't think it's super top-heavy right now. I think Unicorns of Love, who is #1 in Group B, has definitely had extremely close games against a lot of the other teams in their group. And while they did win them, I don't think they're like way better than most of the other teams in that group. And I think Group A, while G2 is the best, it's somewhat the same. A little bit, I guess, G2 is slightly ahead of Unicorns in that regard. But I think we have a lot of very cool up-and-coming teams. And I mean, like, Misfits is one of them. I think, like, funny enough, Splice, even though they haven't changed anything, I'm expecting them to pick up the pace very soon. And then I think we might have, like, 5 potential top teams that can actually compete in playoffs and play some really competitive games.
Yeah. Exciting to see, too, because we've seen so many teams in the past be really exciting in the regular season and then not be able to kind of bring something to the table when it comes to best of 5. Overall. And do you guys kind of echo Deficio's statement here? Do you feel like there's a lot of strong teams right now, or are you guys mainly looking at 1 or 2 at the top of the table?
I agree. Like, I think today's series in particular also showed that the difference between like the perceived top teams like H2K and G2 to like Vitality and Giants maybe isn't as big as people thought. Like before today, I definitely would have expected Giants to maybe take a game with G2, or for the series between H2K and Vitality to be so close. So I don't think the difference is as big as it might have looked.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty exciting to see. I love having a lot of top teams. I know, it's good. Good to get parity between the teams, parity between the groups. But, of course, thank you again so much, Daku, Alfari, for joining me. Deficio as well. I shouldn't thank you. This is your job.
Thank me.
I am not thanking you. All right, well, that's going to do it for us tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central European Time, 7 a.m. Pacific, for our friends across the Atlantic, as the EU LCS 2017 Spring